The game Pokemon Go has taken the world by storm, but it also has some few injuries that come along with it. Stories of distracted gamers wandering into danger are emerging, with a man crashing his car into a police car, two players falling off a cliff, people trespassing, and several youngsters were actually stranded in underground caves searching for Pokemon. Now, these are just a few examples. And now there are signs at the National Holocaust Museum and at Arlington National Cemetery asking visitors not to play the Pokemon Go game while they're there. So is this game worth the risk? Joining us now is Dr. Shane Pase. He's a media and technology psychologist who has studied virtual reality for several years. Welcome to the program.
Hi.
Now, Pokemon Go is a game that allows players to use smartphones to search for digital characters in real-life locations that uses their GPS location. But people are getting robbed, falling off cliffs, and jeopardizing their personal information. Can you tell me why so many people are taking these risks just to play this game?
Well, I think it's a game that really strikes a chord with a lot of players. It's a story that's been around for a very long time, the Pokemon series itself. It started out as a cartoon and as a card game, and there's been various types of video games that came from it over the years. So since it's been out for so long and it's had such a loyal following, as people have grown up, they've become attached to the game. So now that they've got another opportunity to play a new high-tech version, they're really drawn to it. You add in the idea that it's kind of a social experience now, and it becomes a social norm. People are drawn to play it because other people are playing it. And if you're not playing it, well, then maybe you're missing out on something, and maybe you're not as cool as your friends, so to speak.
Well, police have warned that armed robbers have lain in wait for Pokemon hunters at Pokestops. The GPS tracking dimension has also sparked fears that pedophiles could exploit the game. Is this game safe for kids and teens to play, not to mention adults?
Well, I think like any other game that takes place in the real world, I think that there are inherent risks that are involved. Is it safe for kids? I think that really boils down to each kid, and I think it has to do with the parent's decision on how much can your kid be trusted to keep their head up while they're playing this game and not to trespass and be aware of what we call stranger danger still to this day. So I think it really boils down to each person taking a lot of responsibility for themselves when they're playing this game. Well, the game, yes, is most certainly addictive and it certainly draws your attention in. You need to be aware of the risks that come along with it. A significant concern that we have is what's called the Pokemon lures. And this allows players to set up a signal to say, hey, I'm here playing in this location, to normally allow people to come and join them to play. It's also been the source of a couple of the strong arm robberies that you mentioned, where some of the criminals have set these Poke lures up, and people have gone to play with these people only to find themselves on the wrong end of a gun. There's concern, of course, that pedophiles will use this to lure children into some really nasty situations as well. So, as a psychologist, if you are playing the game and you're being aware of your surroundings and you're using common sense, I think you're fine. As a parent, it concerns me because of all the stories we hear about the potential risks for your child being abducted or assaulted in any way, shape, or form. So, as a parent, I don't let my kid play it, but again, I think it boils down to each parent knowing their own child and whether their child is responsible enough to play and be aware of the dangers that surround them.
So there are physical dangers, but there's also that security risk there. There were security concerns from players who sign in through Google because they were inadvertently surrendering all of their personal data from Google to Niantic Labs. Has that issue been resolved?
Yes, the Niantic Labs almost immediately issued an update for the game in which they changed the amount of data that was being taken away from the players' phones. However, it's still reliant upon the player to update the game and to sign out and sign back in. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not still taking a significant amount of data away from your phone. It just means they don't have total access to your Google account. But again, that relies on the player to update the game itself. And if you don't, then they still have access to your full Google account. Whether they ever use that access is another thing. But you got to remember, anytime you're talking about data usage and data mining on the phones, they have the ability to share that data with the other developers and third-party people that they have connections with. So that means you don't always know who's getting your information or what their plans to use that information for are. There's also a serious concern about hacking. So if the game is hacked, which there have been reports now twice that it has been, there is a potential risk that that information could be leaked out or accessed by somebody else with more nefarious desires.
Cybersecurity company Risk IQ discovered 215 rogue versions of the Pokemon Go on the Google Play App Store, and that's, I'm guessing, because it's not available everywhere. What's the risk when downloading the rogue versions, and how can we tell the difference?
Well, the risks the risks are pretty significant when you start talking about downloading alternate versions of the game or support versions of the game. You start talking about software that could have viruses, it could have malware, could have spyware. Um, so you're running the risk of it taking over more information from your phone that it wouldn't normally have access to. Um, the other thing that you can do to really make sure that you're getting the actual game is to get it from the proper sources, that being the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. So you want to make sure you're getting the real game from Niantic Labs and Nintendo um, from reliable sources like Google Play or Apple Store. If you start going into some of the other games, especially in third-party application sources with Google or with Android, you run the risk of getting some of these non-real versions, and you run the risk of your phone getting hacked. You run the risk of all sorts of nefarious activities. So I would definitely avoid downloading it from anywhere that's not the official version.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that this game has really struck an accord with all sorts of people. And now there's reports that some of our nation's lawmakers were seen playing Pokemon Go on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. Does the game pose a governmental security threat, or at any companies in general, would it pose a threat?
Well, I think that most of the companies are going to have secured servers, and most players are signing in with their own devices. So unless you're playing with an issued device from a company or from the government, that's the only risk I could see it really posing. I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of hacking just through the Wi-Fi signal itself. You'd have to really know what you're doing to go through the device, then into a Wi-Fi network to hack the data. I think it says more about the responsibility of the players than it does the security risk for like national security, because a senator or a representative is using it on the floor in the House.
So overall, do you think that companies should have a mobile app policy in place?
I think most companies do, or a lot of companies do already.
Okay.
And so I think that helps limit the exposure to the companies. And if they don't, it's definitely a game that's a time killer. So if you want that productivity to remain focused on work and not catching, Charmander or whoever you're going after next, or going to the gym to battle out with somebody else, I think it's a good idea that companies, have a policy in place to ensure that they're not losing work time to this game, because it will definitely suck you in and keep you focused in. It's got one of the best retention rates of any game ever made.
Now, if you had to compare the risks, if you had to weigh the security risk versus the physical danger risk, which one do you think is worse?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think that they will generally always work on improving the game's security, because let's face it, Niantic doesn't want the bad press of millions of accounts being hacked. I think people tend to be way more concerned about their information being hacked than they are about their physical safety. But for me, I've studied what's known as inattentional blindness for a very long time. That's the idea that when you focus your attention on something so strongly that you can easily miss obvious objects that you would not have missed had you been paying attention to the real world. So for me, it's far more risky physically, safety-wise, to go out and play this game, because your head's down. You're constantly looking for these little monsters, and when you do so, you run the risk of walking off a curb, trespassing in somebody else's property, walking into a bad neighborhood because you're chasing that one monster you want so bad.
Yeah.
Or worse, stepping off a curb and getting hit by a car because you simply are not paying attention to the real world.
Yeah. Well, if gamers do decide to play Pokemon Go, they just need to keep in mind that they're in the real world and must be aware of all the real world obstacles that come along with it, like traffic lights and cars. Dr. Shane Pase, thanks so much for coming on with us tonight.
It's been my pleasure.